inviting me. A very, a very detailed resume, but I think well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. As I said, it's a privilege and an honor to be part of this. Um, I have a kind of illustrious background in anti-corruption, governance, and ethics, and yeah, having been introduced to the AI ethics space through the Pan Africa uh, Center for Ethics, I have been on an interesting journey since last year, and share some of my experience with you today, if that's possible. Well, I hope you enjoy it, and please feel free to ask questions. Um, I'm actually going to tie into what Tubby has just done, as opposed to maybe the original brief that I had. I did share with King that I'd rather talk about the things that I'm really passionate about of late, and that's issues around governance uh, um, and accountability. So let's get into it. I'm gonna just phase this. The reason why I would want to frame this the way I have is because, for those of you who don't know, Mervyn King, Dr. Mervyn King has initiated, as of King One Commission, now it's King Five, um, as a broad governance framework that has become globally known, and almost every institution around the world, but whether it be private or public, do make use of these broad principles that are underpinned within the King Commission recommendations. And the latest iteration is King 5. The biggest challenge, and this is what I said to Kingsley, I'd rather just talk about it because it's so topical. King 5 has missed the mark completely in terms of incorporating how AI is going to influence decisions at a board level. And I'll take you through my personal playbook, having been in the ethics, governance, anti-corruption space for more than 2 decades, and how I think this is going to play out. In fact, this morning I just wrote to the IOD, the Institute of Directors, who are the custodians of the King Commission's recommendations. They do a lot of training, governance training, board level training for directors of companies and private sector public sector institutions as well. The challenge is that they've just missed the mark. And the closing date for comments was in May, sorry, in April. I wrote to them today with the saying that I've only discovered the mark now, and I thought it was so topical that I should share some of the thinking with you here today, if that's with permission. So a little bit of introduction. It'll give you some context for my background, how I saw corporate governance in the last 2 decades, and where some of the broad challenges that some of them would be familiar to you, some are international examples. And of course, I'll relate back to South African examples because we share of corporate scandals and failures, and then incorporate that into the evolved thinking of how AI needs to be, or rather governance needs to be embrace this new technology. And I don't think we're going to get it right in the near future. That's the challenge. So I'll talk to it. It makes sense to you, and there's opportunities for you to explore this further through your research initiatives out of this course. So let's agree in principle that the world's in a serious crisis. We can look at it whichever way, no matter which part of the world you're coming from, there's a level of crisis. Now with the advanced technology in AI in particular, we know that it's laid our challenges even further. We've had this before, where none of us knew the outcome of the pandemic, for example, 2019, 2020. Did we, and this is my challenge, because I was still in government at the time, one of the things I used to say, how do we reset? I think a higher force, let's say God, kind of testing us to revisit what we've been doing as a global society. And there's so many challenges we're facing right now, and I'm passionate about climate change, for example. But the problem is, what are we doing about it? How are we governing our institutions differently to accommodate for what, let's say, in this case, COVID exposed us to? And we were all very vulnerable. Our institutions were vulnerable. As individuals, we were vulnerable. What have we learned? Not much, actually. Because one of the things that post COVID, one of the things I said to my team, how do we become more relevant and more impactful. I can tell you for free that nothing changed. The institutions remained bureaucratic. The institutions remained conservative. And you kind of wonder, how come they're not taking a cue from whatever God has bestowed upon us from to kind of give us a wake-up call that what we're doing is not sustainable, change it. And I think for me, this is the playbook I've experienced in my last 20 odd years in law enforcement. And I'm really worried about this new advent of advanced technology, AI, and how if we haven't changed during COVID, chances are we're not going to change in the way AI needs to be governed. It does present some serious challenges to us. It's also escalating this issue of us all feeling somewhat paralyzed because everything is so uncertain. I know one of the cohorts did bring about the question of the black box. The truth is we don't know. None of us know. And nobody on this call, no expert on this call, will be able to confirm that you know exactly what's happening. None of us actually know. What we can do, and therefore I said, let me focus on the issue of governance. What we can do is try to mitigate this future risk by governing a little bit more responsibly. This is one of my favorite slides when I was teaching ethics at the time. And it's called the 16 squares. And one of the things that I appreciate is that there's such a diverse group on the summer school right now. Your worldview will be different from my worldview, will be different from Kingsley's worldview, will be different from Tavi's worldview. And you've broken out into groups now. You would have had a totally different perspective of each other. And I'm sure each of us want to make a positive contribution to the world. But the view we take of this is so critical. So just to put it into context here, there are 30 squares here, perfect squares. Right now, you're probably seeing 16, if not 17. But I need to take you through a journey to get you to 30. And because of time constraints, I just wanted to give you a sense. Everyone has their worldview, and we need to respect that worldview. So in the context of where we find ourselves from a development, deployment, user perspective, everyone will see it differently. Everyone will push their respective agendas. They have their own narratives. We're seeing this playing out, whether it's between the US and China or other jurisdictions, the EU, for example. We have access to these things. I feel very privileged, as I said, since I've been on the summer school last year. I've been on such an interesting journey. And to tell you the truth, I can't get enough of this. But I think we want to contribute to the world, but at the same time, and leverage off your previous experience, which I'm doing, right? And each of you will have your own unique experiences and core skills. How do you leverage off that, but with the intention of making the world better? So to put into context again, some of us may say 16 squares, and some of you may say more. But if I were to take you on this journey, I'll get you to the 30. So it's symbolic that all of us have to go on this journey, and nobody has the right answers. 16 is correct for some of you, 17 will be correct for some of you, 22 will be correct for some of you, but to get to 30, we all need to evolve to get that point. I hope the analogy is a good enough analogy for all of you. I think, and this has been my take, so I've been in the ethics space since 2002. I studied in the US in 2002. I've been practicing it for, as Kingsley said, for more than 2 decades. I love it. However, I think I'm not as impactful as I thought I was, because there's a lot more moral cues that we can draw from different facets of society. And my interest in AI of late is because whatever I've learned in the 20 years, as of last year, I realized actually I know nothing. I actually know nothing. I'm actually a lot more confused. I'm a lot more lost. I'm completely, the world here is bewildered by what's going on. I need to find that niche for myself in how I can contribute better to the world or to these conversations. And I'll share a book shortly that I was part of a webinar, a book launch yesterday, and I found that really resonates with my current thinking. What the world needs right now is a sense of moral realignment. And I think the technology is unfortunately taking us down a dark hole. We haven't got the basics in place right now from a sense of social morality. And look at what's going on in the world, and not going into the details of it, but what's going on in the world right now, we don't know what the true sense of right and wrong is. Now you layer it with technology, that in itself is confusing us because it creates its own version of what the truth is. And we're not going to go into the details of that. Your other presentations will delve into that from an algorithmic point of view. But the reality is that I just feel that we don't have the basics of humanity in place. And that's a big concern because you need critical thinking to be able to discern even when we are influenced by AI. You need to be able to read between the lines, as it were. So I think terminology is important, and I'll just talk on the issues of broad governance, the way I understood it for the 20 years. And then I'll take one of the values that good governance talks about, and that is accountability, because there's so many other values. They call them the RAFT principles, which is responsibility, accountability, which I'm going to talk about, uh, um, fairness and transparency. That's generally most governance frameworks around the world talk of those four principles. But we just highlight one for in the interest of time to highlight one. But I think accountability is what we're really talking about in terms of how AI is evolving and where it needs to hold us accountable at different phases of the spectrum. So what is corporate governance? Corporate governance is a system of rules, practices, and processes by which a firm is directed and controlled. It can apply equally, they call them sector supplements. So it can apply equal to the NGO sector, it can apply equal to where I come from, the government. It applies equal to all of these sectors. You can actually apply it equally in your home. There's a center in Oslo called Hyper Island, and they're doing a lot of this for individuals. How do you see yourself as a brand? And who do you have in your corner? And I think I'll talk about that a little later. But it's such a powerful principle of how you govern they call it self-governance. How do you govern yourself? Then you make an indelible mark on the institution that you belong to, or in your community, or even in your own home. But it's how do you take your brand? Because everything that's being said from a corporate governance point of view applies equally to your personal brand. It outlines how an institution, I'll say, I said put company, but an institution is bad. It ensures accountability to stakeholders and compliance with the regulations. That's really how corporate governance was initially initiated. And I'll talk about King 5 in the context of what I'm going to share with you now, and how that thinking has to evolve as well, which I think, as I said, they missed the mark. It is crucial for building trust. And the word trust, I'm going to highlight throughout the rest of my presentation. One of the biggest challenges right now in the world is the diminished sense of trust. And you can take it right down to your nuclear family. Forget about corporate level, or forget about geopolitical level. Take it down to your nuclear family or within your community. This is such a new currency that we need to develop. And I think if we get that right, then everything else would fall in place. And to my original point, we don't have the basics of issues of trust in place. How are we layering this with technology? And I'm not suggesting that we stop the technology. What we do need to build is a balanced overview of these things. What are the key aspects of corporate governance? Okay, I'm assuming that many of you know this, but if you don't, I'll just take you through it quickly. It's about at a board level, which made sense historically to give direction and control, to manage the stakeholder interest, to the issues that I spoke about, accountability, transparency, being an ethical or being perceived as an ethical institution, and then of course managing risk and complying with your compliance framework, right? Why is it important? And again, the word trust comes up, right? Trust and confidence, long-term sustainability. Every large multinational is exactly what they want. Every institution, every political party, every government wants to see that they can last forever. And of course, it improves performance and brings about the ethical culture and a conducive culture to take your business forward. In essence, corporate governance is not just about ticking boxes. It's about creating a framework for responsible and sustainable business practices that benefit all stakeholders. And I think the challenge, this has been my experience, we've been reduced to a tick box exercise. So for example, I'm actually an ethics governance specialist, right? But my default is anti-corruption and ethics. What I do realize, and I'm talking from a South African perspective, and I've been on numerous forums, as Kingsley has alluded to in my brief resume, not a single time, not a single time during my journey where there was a common commitment towards what we're going to do. As long as you can tick the box to say that you, for example, I'll give you an example. We have a anti-corruption framework within our institution. I come from the National Prosecuting Authority for the last 13 years. I was head of border control before that. All of these things, I had no opportunity, I would say, to get my colleagues in other departments to be able to appreciate that this is not a tick box. This is for collaboration to make certain you have a whole of society, whole of government approach to what we're doing. That was lacking because everyone had their own, unfortunately, silo thinking that reduced it to a reporting, in our case, to Parliament, to the National Director, or in the case of the Justice Cluster, or beyond that to Parliament. As long as you prove that you could tick the box that you've got the following things in place. How well it is done is another matter. And I think that's where, if you think about the escalation of what we're going to talk about now, how does this relate back to the governance of AI? We must be just guarded that it mustn't fall into the trap of what I've experienced over 20 years as a tick box exercise. As I said, the RAF principles are fundamental to governance. RAF meaning, again, responsibility, accountability, transparency, and fairness and transparency. I'm just going to take this one principle because it's important, right? And I'll show you in terms of what I call an accountability matrix, how important it is from development right through to user. Where does the accountability begin and end? That's where we need to appreciate why governance, a broad governance framework, is so important. So what is accountability? An acceptance of a responsibility for honest and ethical conduct towards others, right? So think about the definition, and I'll relate it back when we're talking about AI and governance. So at this point, I just want to highlight a few of the experiences. I mean, sure, you can, within your own jurisdiction, you can name, I'm sure, at your fingertips, so many corporate scandals, institutional scandals, that I mean, South Africa, we're not short of that. We got scandal literally churning around the news cycles every single day. Every day there's something happening. But I'll just highlight a few, and the ones that you may be able to relate to in some way are the international ones: McKinsey, Siemens, Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, EOH, IOCA in South Africa. Now they've changed their name. They even changed their brand to help protect their image. But the two that I want to talk about very quickly, and then I'll go into what in South Africa we experienced over a few years, state capture and what came out of that. Siemens and EOH. What I like about it, and this is where we need to go, I think, is the sense of accountability. Take ownership of the challenges you faced. Take ownership of the fact that you've been implicated in corrupt and unethical practices. Take ownership. And EOH had what's called the EOH experience. I was part of the thing. Just coming out and say, be sorry, pay the money back to us, the National Treasury, and they're talking about billions here. In the case of Siemens, undercutting General Electric globally, dominating the global market, acknowledge that they use corrupt means to undercut, especially General Electric globally. And this is a historical case study. What they did, they created what's called the Siemens Integrity Initiative, meaning that they want to redeem themselves. The same with EOH. So those are two good examples of where institutions decided that, given the fact that they've been found wanting, they rather invest money back and say, it's obviously to rebuild their brand integrity, that's the one, and two, to do good. And I think that's the playbook I want to be in now. How do we use AI for good? And I'm passionate about it. This is where I want to find myself. The problem is, like with state capture, there is so much of adversity in the world. Where do you even start? My take would be start where you have a little bit of control. You have a bit of influence. Whether you're from an NGO sector represented here on the summer school, whether you're representing your respective institution, whether you're just learning the stuff, find out where it is you can make the greatest impact. And I think Kingsley, in the earlier introduction, mentioned, where do you collaborate? How do we support each other? And I really don't know all the answers. But what I do know is I've had a wonderful experience. I still want to contribute to society, and I still want to contribute via this new intervention, technology intervention, where I know it can go horribly wrong if we don't put better governance principles in place and enforce it. That's the part. We need to enforce it. I proposed this while I was still working, incidentally. I had an idea to create what is called an accountability matrix. They had 250 odd subsidiaries. That is where they went horribly wrong. They didn't have a uniform organizational culture. Each one operate on their own. And of course, you know, if there's no control, you're in big trouble. And that's what happened to them. So that led to their demise. So I said, okay, so how do you create a matrix? So you got a head office head office culture. How do you start to bring all the other 200 odd entities into this new way of thinking? It required a whole leadership shift. Therefore, they've moved across now to a new entity, new leadership. And Stephen van Coller was the CEO at the time. When he came in, he saw what has happened. And that's where they started this process of building. I built this tool for them. It's called an accountability matrix, just to understand where does the lines of accountability begin and end. And they've embraced it. Obviously, they've taken it as their own now. But I think there's opportunity, given whatever experiences you've had, to help institutions, organizations like this to change what they're doing. And then firstly, acknowledge. And the one thing I learned, you need to be humble to acknowledge that you, as an institution, you may have, many thousands of employees, but if you didn't get the basics right, you're in trouble. And to humble yourself to say, put up your hand and say, I need some help. And I think that was the start of a good turnaround for EOH. The sad part for me this year, one of the directors who was part of a conversation that I had when I addressed the board at that time, she claimed to have a PhD. And she didn't have a PhD. And she was part of our conversations. And she got exposed recently. That's a scary, scary. And remember, you're engaging with people like this. And I go back to my recommendation for Hyper Island about scrutinizing who's on your corner, scrutinizing who's on your board. I currently sit on the SIU, Special Investigation Board. I got appointed in February this year. I said, I will not sit on the board unless you put me through a rigorous process, although I'm from an integrity background. I said, put me as a principled issue, put me through the entire vetting. So I got top secret clearance vetting in South Africa. Now, I've had it before, so I know what it entails, but it's rigorous. That means none of these board members have gone through this. That is what we exposed. And she got exposed now for faking her qualifications. And I'm sure this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other institutions in South Africa, including multinationals, who don't have the vetting process that, let's say, I was subjected to. It cannot be right. Because it really compromises, like in this case, EOH not only got compromised previously and came out, they now got exposed even further that they haven't done the vetting on their board members. This is scary. All right, so I hope that sets a good foundation for where I find myself, and that's been my historical playbook. And I'm hoping that I can, through what I can influence now, and as I said, I sent the email off today, but I think I'm passionate enough to, and my experience, bodes well in terms of how I can help the IOD retrain, especially the directors of her caliber, for example, who have really lied about their qualifications. How did they get it wrong? They gone for director training, and the first thing you should know is you should have integrity, right? And this is how we missed that. I call AI a Pandora's box, and I think the lady who alluded to the black box, we're there. And what I liked yesterday, as part of this conversation, how do you govern Pandora? It's actually impossible to govern Pandora, but you can build some resilience skills, some leadership skills to be able to govern a little bit better. And I go back to my point about COVID. Did we do things differently? From my personal experience, no. The institution I represented, we carried on as if COVID never even happened. How is that possible? We should have changed certain things, and we didn't. And I think we're at the point now, and I love this idea. I love the idea of how do you govern Pandora? This thing is opened, and we all know the regulations follow the innovation. We're always behind the curve, but whether we like it or not, we don't have an alternative. We've got to do something. And this is where I think all of us can make a contribution. So this is what we're faced with, right? It's happening already, right? Uh, you can't leave this without human oversight because the technology and it's moving into generative AI. It's moving to a point where it'll make its own decisions. How well is it informed? We know now it's not true. Again, I go back to the black box. How it's computing its own decision-making processes, we don't know actually, but it's definitely may not lead to a good outcome. This is just an example, and I'm sure you can relate to many other examples. So corporate governance structures traditionally designed to oversee human decision making often lack the expertise and mechanisms required to address the complexities of AI-based systems. This is where I find myself, and I'm saying, given my experience, I definitely can help a little bit in terms of thinking. Whether it makes a big dent, I don't know, but I think it's worth and courtesy of the PAC5 to be able to, through the summer school, keep these conversations top of mind. It's important. It's so important. Questions arise about how to ensure transparency when decision processes are driven by opaque algorithms, how to assign responsibility when errors emerge from complex socio-technical systems, and how to align AI deployment with legal obligations, fiduciary duties, and stakeholder interests. So you think about legal obligations, fiduciary duties, and stakeholder interests. The reality is that, again, I go back to the IOD, and I've challenged them about the way they train the directors. This was the basis on which corporate governance training was done to board members, to directors of companies. They used this and of course, again, to my reference to Hyper Island about who's in your corner, what are the sort of different skills you require to sit on the board. At one point, I can say this to you because I've sit on the CFAE, the Committee for Auditor Ethics. The auditing profession, as an example, where we're confined to in South Africa, the big five, big four auditing firms. That's Deloitte, KPMG, EY, Ernst & Young, and PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And of course, the older days was Accenture, well, Arthur Andersen in those early days. They themselves need governance. And if they determine the state of the auditing and accounting profession in South Africa or across the world, it's a problem. They need to have alternate voices. So I sat on the CFAE because what happened is that they approached social scientists like myself to come in and say, give us an alternate voice. And I think this is the way forward. So one of the things that came out of yesterday's session to the book launch of Governing Pandora was, who's on your board? You cannot have the traditional, what I would call, with respect, old boys club. The people who think the same, eat the same, drink the same, think the same, right? The same way of maintaining the old boys club mentality, if you know what I'm referring to. You've got to have alternate voices. And that could even include a good mix of women, younger, older generation, to be able to give different voices that talk to the legal fiduciary duties from a different perspective. So if you can relate this back to the 16 squares analogy I use, you want 16 to see those who see 16, and you also want those who see 30. I hope that makes sense to all of you. For me, this is a no-brainer. Should corporate governance be reimagined? Absolutely. Has to be. And this is where I say to the last point of my presentation is the IOD got it wrong, and I'll tell you why. So how AI changing the way decisions are being made in an organization. It's a fact. For those of you who have mature AI interventions in your institution, you'll understand it's starting to influence things that you never expected. There's huge structural misfits. So the way we were structured, for example, I've been in a bureaucratic institution like the NPA. I spent 13 years there. Nothing changed because we inherited those systems. We inherited the bureaucratic structures. And one of the roles that I'm supposed to have played was, it's called the OEA, Office of Ethics and Accountability, across the entire justice cluster. you're fighting against thunder because not everybody at the same maturity level to embrace the new way of thinking. There's a complete structural misfit. Our current government's models equipped to handle the dynamic nature of AI? No, we're not ready for that yet. We've fitting this AI systems into old structures. It's a problem. Therefore, we need a complete governance upgrade. What would it take for governance to become a strategic enabler? So I'm actually working on what is called a AI governance accelerator model at the moment, like I did with the Matrix. I'm building that with guys in Australia at the moment. We're looking at that as a tool that we can help, so that it mustn't become a sort of a disabler or a bottleneck, as it were, to your AI journey. So what are the current complications? There's no practice leadership guiding AI governance adoption. Governments, industry, the civil society remain completely misaligned. And I can tell you from my own experience, this whole silo mentality played out in my case, the justice cluster. Nobody thinks, not nobody, very few people think in the same way. You've literally got to handhold them through this new way of thinking. And it requires lots of, I should call it whining and dining. You take them informally outside the formal structure to talk to them on the side and say, have you thought of it like this? Have you thought of it like that? And then you kind of win them over. But it's a slow, tedious process. But you've got to do that. Doing it formally in a formal meeting, you get those who kind of not step aside. They have their own mini groups, and they come there with a defensive mentality, so you can't win. The idea is to wine and dine them on the corner. And I think this is what AI is going to require of us going forward. Momentum requires coordination, not more frameworks. Now, I think all of us will agree that there's so many frameworks around the world. We can read and read and read. I'm overwhelmed, and I'm very new to the space. But to be honest, historically, there's so many policy frameworks around the world. We don't always adhere to it. Most of it is redundant. Some of the AI interventions are also redundant right now. There are evolving AI regulations and guidelines, which I think we need to be cognizant of. And I was saying to somebody yesterday, I've invested in every single book that's come out on AI, and I haven't read all of it, to be fair. There's one that came out yesterday, launched yesterday. I kind of resonate to the ones that talk about oversight governance, and I love it. Now we got to think differently. It's not about the guidelines or regulations. We've got to think beyond the rules and regulations. And what does it mean? Go back to my historical past, back to basics, back to basics. We have to go back to the drawing board in terms of our social morality. That's where it starts. That's where we're going to develop our critical thinking skills, all of those things that are not in place right now. And as the technology evolves, it's making us lazy thinkers. And let's be honest with that. All right, so this is my last part of the presentation. I hope that it's built in a strong enough foundation for why I can convincingly, and this is not just for you, incidentally, it's for the IOD or the custodians of the King 5. I have a problem with this, and you'll understand my frustration. But I've said it to them. How they interpret it and embrace it, it's up to them. So King 5 is globally recognized, sorry, King 4, I should say, is globally recognized in its principled outcomes-based approach to corporate governance. We would imagine that the iteration of King 4 would have considered what AI is going to do, or what I call an AI-mediated world. They missed it. How? So that means they didn't have the right people in the boardroom when they're talking about this. They shouldn't have had me, but they should have had the likes of Kingsley and others. So sit in the corner and say, listen, have you all considered the following? They didn't. We understand its relevance. We understand where it's important from a broader global governance point of view. And it's acknowledged in some way. It's actually in Principle 9 in information governance. Hello, it's a small aspect. It's a very small aspect of information governance or IT governance. AI is much bigger than that, and it's much more threatening than that. So AI is treated primarily as a technical asset to manage rather than a transformative force that reshapes how organizations make decisions, allocate power, and establish accountability. This is what I've written to them. You cannot have those in tech in your organization. Like we had a dedicated IT department. I can tell you for free, I know their maturity level or lack of maturity. There's no way I'm going to have a conversation with them about this. They think they got it covered. They don't have it covered. They need people from this cohort, from this faculty, to be able to sit to them and say, have you thought it? Therefore, the need for an accelerator. That's what we are looking at the moment. AI changes how decisions are made, by whom, and our decisions can be explained, contested, and trusted. I think we're all on this page, right? When boards treat AI as just an IT or data risk issue, critical aspects, this is the part that I'm really concerned about, of oversight, including ethics, legitimacy, fairness, and accountability, fall through the cracks. And again, I say this for free. I've been in the space for 20 years in the oversight, governance, ethics, and anti-corruption space. At the end of my career, I felt actually I didn't make a difference, because a lot of it, I was trying to do this on my own. It's impossible if you don't convince people to buy into this new thinking of long-term sustainability. The result is a widening gap between King Five's governance outcomes. Incidentally, the comments period is over. It was finished in April, but I wrote it anyway. And real-world AI-driven decision. So this gap is going to widen even further. Forget about generative AI and quantum computing. That's another level altogether. We have to somehow plug these gaps right now. What happens if we don't act? If King 5 does not evolve to provide explicit practical guidance on AI governance, its influence could diminish in the sectors where AI drives decision-making. Boards may default to right now. I can tell you for free, that woman, for example, with respect, she lied for a long period of time, even while we were discussing where EOH went wrong. She was one of the people where we went wrong. We vetted incorrectly. Boards may default to fragmented checkbox-driven compliance approaches, or worse, ignore AI oversight entirely. It's a reality. So the issue of C-suite AI literacy is critical right now. This will create a trust deficit. Already there's a trust deficit, a further trust deficit, I'd say, increasing regulatory and reputational exposure, and undermine King 5's legitimacy as a future-ready governance framework. So what happens? What's the consequence if you don't do the right thing? And I'm putting this out to all of you. In whichever way you can help influence in your respective jurisdiction, have these conversations. AI decisions may be unethical or non-compliant with broader data and privacy obligations. Security vulnerabilities may be exploited by malicious actors, and we know there's more and more of them emerging with one motive, and that is profit-driven and power-driven. Trust in the brand and digital offerings may be eroded, and we're seeing that play out every day right now. One trying to undermine another brand. Fragmented oversight undermines risk management and the business continuity. That's for me, it's a long-term existential risk beyond just what we're talking about in terms of corporates or institutions. Boards don't need to understand the code, and this is the part that, if it's any takeaway, this is the important takeaway for you. But they have to govern the consequence. It's too late. The Pandora's box has been opened. What we need to do is govern better, create better guardrails, have new conversations. This imperative is clear. The organizations must balance innovation with responsible AI use to maintain stakeholder trust and protect enterprise value. And this is urgent. I cannot emphasize it. So this is what I'm recommendation. This is incidentally what I recommended to the IOD now. As they've done before, but the practice notes were weak. Introduce a King 5 practice note or addendum titled Governance in the Age of AI, Interpreting King 5 Principles in an AI Media. I have no idea how they missed this. Offer an AI governance companion to King 5. King 5 sets out what good governance should achieve: ethical culture, performance, conformance, and legitimacy. The problem is now, this is what was historical, right? You need to factor in the influence of AI. And I'm suggesting also create an AI governance center of excellence where we have all the relevant experts sitting in one room to be able to have this conversation from all facets of life, not necessarily techies, not necessarily the big companies, the big AI companies of the world. And right now, if you look at what's happening in the US, they sit on most of these boards. They have actually sit in government, as we know with Elon Musk, influencing how global policies are being developed. It cannot be. So they have a lot more power than they should have. And it's determining the world agenda. Cannot be. A commercially run private-public platform designed to accelerate responsible AI adoption, unlock economic participation, and embed trust at the core of the digital transformation. In conclusion, traditional corporate governance models were never designed for this. They assume a world where humans make predictable, accountable choices, not systems that learn and evolve. And I think the point is that we know where this is going from a generative AI point of view. This creates a growing gap, a structural misfit, which I mentioned before, between how decisions are made and how accountability enforced. The accountability matrix that I put together for EOH or IOCOA now is still relevant. We can liken it to, as I said, developers right through to users, and have the spectrum where there's lines of accountability across that entire spectrum. The solution isn't to bolt AI onto the side of existing models. You cannot do that. And this is where I think many corporates are really struggling. They think this is an add-on. It's not an add-on. It's part of your entire governance framework. It's to rethink and extend corporate governance to include AI-specific controls, oversight, and ethical safeguards. That is what I think, from a summer school point of view, this will be your second takeaway. How do you help protect this by building better safeguards and better guardrails? If we don't evolve, we risk eroding trust, accountability, and the very legitimacy of corporate decision making. Thank you. Thank you, Kingsley, for the opportunity again. I hope it made some impact on your cohort, and I'm happy to take any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Praveen, for that insightful session. Please, let's put our hands together for Praveen for that wonderful session. We will be taking some questions and answer, and also we would combine the previous questions that we had from the previous session, and then we could have like a joint question and answer. All right. There is a question here from Savin. And the question is, wonderful session. I had attended, whatever session I attended till now, that clearly opens the impact of corporate compliance when the company starts to use it as part of their culture. This is not only, okay, this is not a question. Is there any question? Any question for Praveen? If you have a question, you could type it on the chat box, or you could just raise your hands. Okay, Karima?
Yes. It's actually the same question that I asked the previous presenter. If AI is not explainable, how do we use it in decision making in corporates or in the government when we don't know how it came up with its decisions? And I didn't get an answer from the previous presenter. I got a remark about how the chiefs gather people to get their names or something. I didn't get the full answer. So if you can help give me the answer to that. Thank you.
Rima, you and I are on the same page. I have a problem, and I think my background is important because I'm very skeptical, right? I'm not a huge fan. It's obviously people have embraced it. It does improve efficiency, and we know all the good stuff of it. But I think I use it as an example, as a nice anecdote. My daughter's father-in-law owns a very big company, an advertising company, and he was boasting at the airport when we were seeing them off recently that he's asked his staff to generate a Human Rights Day poster, and he said he got up at 11 o'clock at night, or I'm sorry, he got up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it took him half an hour to generate the poster that they spent a month on. And he said, he's showing it to me at the airport. And I said, but that's theft. I said, you've stolen that. That's somebody else's IP. But he's not getting it. And I think as much as, yes, it improves efficiency, it makes you look good. The reality is that you're right, it's unexplainable. And you can't take credit for it. So you're talking to the wrong person, because I'm a big skeptic, and therefore my passion about overseeing this. The reality is that we have to have a balanced approach. We know exactly what you're saying, and I think most people know this can't be explained. And I am very worried when governments embrace this. And I appreciate what Tabi is saying. The governments are using it to improve efficiency. Um, Human oversight over these systems have to exist. We cannot allow this to do it on its own. That will lead to our existential demise. So yeah, I think you're talking to a person who's very anti this. I'm not a techie, and I understand that, and I'm not making any money out of this. The reality is that I am very concerned about the oversight, which again, I think, yeah, you're right. We cannot explain it, many of these things. And when you try to explain it, people are quick to defend it. Like in the case, I'm giving you an anecdote of my family, my own family, trying to defend what they did. And I'm saying, it can't be right. Sorry if I hope I've given you some indication of where my headspace is at.
Yes, I mean, because you can feed it all the data that you can, but at the end of the day, we don't know how it used that data and how it came up with all these suggestions and recommendations, and it's being embraced and advocated to be used in government sector, in corporate, while it's still, even engineers. I just saw a video yesterday about an engineer who was talking, we don't know how it works. We don't know how it works. And he kept saying that the entire time. And even with all kinds of data, it's still not explainable and it's not trustworthy. Sorry. So,
100%. 100%.
but
Yeah,
I think it's
I can't give you a technical answer, but I think we're on the same page. Sure.
Okay, thank you very
so
much, Tony.
it's a conversation, I guess. It's going to be
Yes.
a long conversation.
Yes.
Thank
you.
Yeah, also to chip in, many countries are beginning to understand the impact of explainable AI. And one of the approaches or one of the intervention most countries are putting in is that when they are redrafting or drafting their data protection regulation, they try to insert a section to restrict automated decision making. I know that Nigerian data protection regulation, tapping from the GDPR, have such provision where they actually restrict the automated processing of personal data. And this is because most of these companies that are doing this might be using some AI tools that they might not understand the effect of the processing of those data on the data subject. Most of them, might also not understand what's happening behind the doors, behind the closed doors of those automated systems. So those are step further that public sectors, countries are really stepping in to ensure that there is a less there's some sort of transparency and explainability, and that people do not consent to technologies they do not understand why such decisions arrived at. They don't consent to it. So that could also add some sort of context to the question you had. Mamadou, your hand's up.
Thanks once again, Kingsley, for giving me the opportunity to ask Mr. Praveen Naidoo. Hope that you are well. And thank you, sir, for your insightful presentation, sharing with us. And I have a question to the question is, how can a regulatory framework ensure artificial intelligence accountability in corporate environments where systematic corruption may compromise transparency, ethical compliance, and oversight mechanisms?
Yeah, good point. I think the regulations are important, right? It's how we contextualize it for our respective jurisdictions. There's enough regulations around the world. There's enough guidelines around the world, and I think it's about we've got to embrace it. Go back a bit, like anti-corruption frameworks around the world. Does corruption still exist? Has it escalated? Yes. What are the lessons we learned from that? What can we do differently? Should we just ignore the current frameworks, current regulations? No, we've got to embrace it. But like I said, given your own context of the maturity levels of your AI interventions, how do you use it? And essentially take people on a journey with it, but understanding the balance between embracing the regulations and deploying the technology. I think that balance is going to be very important going forward.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think there is another question. How can governments close the gap around data breach in the use of AI system for public trust? We've had scenarios of surveillance which infringe on rights. How can government close up the gap around data breach in the use of AI systems for public trust? We've had scenarios on surveillance which infringe on rights. Praveen, are you able to answer that question?
You know what? Look, you know my background, so I'm really not, but what's happened? So I sit on a board called the SIU, Special Investigation Board, and I do oversight for Parliament. But I've been exposed to things which I share with you now. But it's so interesting from a crime intelligence point of view. This question that you're asking, they've raised this as well, because they know their own limitations and where they would be perceived as a breach, right? A privacy breach. So these, in our case, we call it State Security Agency, SSA, State Security Agency. They're very aware of this in terms of those fine lines that they could very easily breach the privacy laws in the country. But what they do also know, and given the context where South Africa is, and I don't know about your own jurisdictions around the world, we are at a very vulnerable state now. We have very porous borders. So they justify doing what they're doing even in terms of facial recognition and so on. And it was alluded to by Tabi earlier about our border controls. They justified by saying we don't have an alternative. Our foot soldiers have been compromised in terms of their integrity. Corruption is rife on our key points. We'd rather use drones and use facial recognition technology. So there is a justification, and I think at which point do you transgress that to infiltrating privacy? And I think that's where the challenge is. But what I'm glad about is that they're having these conversations. They're not just having it among themselves, in this case, State Security. They're having it with other role players as well. And I think that means there's some level of maturity. Does South Africa currently have a AI strategy, or AI framework? No, they're still building on it. There are some very loose arrangements, but I think it's all part of this conversation. The fact that the issue that you're referring to is part of that conversation is a good sign. I would imagine in other jurisdictions in the world, there's different maturity levels as to how they embrace this. We know, for example, in China, that they have a lot more agile approach to this as opposed to other jurisdictions. So I hope that helps in terms of the response. But I'm seeing some maturity. I want to be part of these conversations, especially from a law enforcement point of view. I understand the risks, but a balancing act between what's out there in the world from other jurisdictions, how do we bring it here, and how do we contextualize it for our current state? Remember, we post state capture, so there's a lot of things happening here where it won't be the same where other countries where they've had a mature democracy. Thanks, Kinsley.
Yeah, thank you very much, Praveen. I think there's a question here. Okay, let me also add some context to the question I was asked earlier. When it comes to AI face recognition system, the line between the protection of and the safety of the citizens and the risk of the government to misuse it is blurry. What can we do to ensure that the PPI, as citizens, are used safely by the government? Thank you. The person that asked this question, I think what we need to, and that's one of the things that the outcome of this summer school, we want to understand the extent at which, AI is being used in public sectors, and also to know the accountability frameworks that is being, adopted, because that would help us to map the country. I understand that several public sectors are beginning to deploy AI. Therefore, for credit scoring, for surveillance system, facial recognition, biometrics. Most of them even use for productivity. We want to know what are the accountability frameworks that are being used and what are the instances of misuse. And I think also in instances like this, that's where we have like the collaboration of various bodies come together to ensure this. For instance, the civil society, the pressure groups, and all the like. So this is where they really come in place to demand accountability from governments. When you see, in fact, NGOs come up, in the instance like this, come up with reports to understand how are these tools being used, and to what extent are the processing of those data used, how secure are those data when they are at rest or when they are, in motion. So this might not be something that you could really have because you are dealing with government here. You might not have a total answer to it, but it's really, pressure groups, NGOs, civil society really help to drive this point home. And I also think that, in questions like this, everybody's really involved to ensure that governments are really accountable when there is the use of data. Praveen, you have a question here. So within the US context, I learned that some of the government agencies were taking the AI developer, within the US context, I learned that some of the government agency were asking the AI developer company to report their training data, etc., as well as their other processing in real time to create some sort of quick evaluation by the government to shorten the bureaucracy. How is this approach can work effectively, as is it technically safe or fair for both parties? Praveen, do you understand this question?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer it very broadly because I think I'm as I said, I'm a bit of a skeptic, right? But the reality is that it depends whose agenda we're following, right? This issue of trust is a big concern, and I think that's the common theme that I've laid out today. Who's who's going to have access to the data? Um, um, are all the necessary guardrails being considered? And I think therein lies that opportunity for, you mentioned now, bringing in all different stakeholders, but again, with the right intent. We're trying to use or extract not to extract, what am I saying? We're trying to mitigate these risks going forward, but with all due considerations to every possible scenario going forward. And one of the things, as soon as I read this part that I wrote here, it's about beyond a governance mindset, just not governing alone, but building resilient institutions. You can't build resilient institutions if you only have policymakers. You only have government officials doing that. You've got to have all different stakeholders sitting in the same room, again, with the right intent. The technology is here. Yes, it can be used for good, but it's also going to be used for bad. Bad actors are going to use this with the wrong intent, right? And I think that is what we need to mitigate and call them out. Call them out if we need to. I hope that gives some context for where my skepticism is. But it's been a long time coming, right? I think we're still behind the curve. We still got a long way to go in terms of governing these things better and having those more mature conversations at those board levels. Like I said, one of the things that the doctor said yesterday in a launch of a book was that just be mindful of who's controlling the agendas of these large corporates in the US, for example. And she used the example of even influencing government at the highest level. I hope that helps, Kingsley.